Here we are at the last video, part 4, the story of Moses. We have covered a lot of information, but there's also a lot that we did not cover. Last session we left Moses on a second trip up the mountain for another set of tablets. He came down with his face so bright that the people could not look on him. He had to wear a veil over his face. They knew he had been in the presence of God. Now we start off with the building of the tabernacle and the ark, the first census, and the sending of the 12 spies into the promised land, where the response of 10 of them condemned the people to 40 years wandering in the desert. We will look at the rebellion of Korah, the death of Miriam and Aaron, and Moses not speaking to a rock, which cost him the privilege of going into the promised land. So let's get started. The building of the tabernacle was not started for some time after Israel arrived at Sinai. The sacred structure was first set up at the opening of the second year from the Exodus. The tabernacle was also called the tent of meeting, because earlier Moses would take a tent with him outside the camp to meet with God. The tabernacle was to be a bigger example for where Moses would meet with God. These chapters give a very exacting set of instructions for each of these items, including what was to be placed in the ark. The 3 things in the ark were the manna, the tablets of the law, and Aaron's rod. In verse 45 it says, "All the Israelites 20 years old and more who were able to serve in the army were counted according to their families. The total number was 603,550. That does not include women and children." In the second year of their travel from Egypt, God told Moses to take a census. Just to put this in perspective, Beaver Stadium holds a little over 107,000. Multiply that by 6, and you have the number. Add the women and children, and you get approximately 2 million. The estimate by historians is that the Israelites numbered between 2 and 3 million. 38 years later, they took another census, and the number was 601,730. It had not changed a whole lot. That is a lot of people. This section shows that God is a God of order. He sets how each tribe is to be arranged in respect to the tabernacle. Different tribes were given different duties. Each tribe was to march and to encamp beside its own standard. It kind of reminds me of my years as a teacher. On the first day of the year, I would set the standards and a sense of order for my class, because these were all new students to me, and I was a new teacher to them. If I did not do this, I was asking for trouble later on. Rules on cleanliness and purity were also given to the Israelites. And finally, a very famous blessing was given to the priests. Numbers 6:24 through 26. "The Lord bless you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you, and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you, and give you peace." On the 20th day of the second month of the second year, the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle of the testimony. Then the Israelites set out from the desert of Sinai and traveled from place to place until the cloud came to rest in the desert of Paran. Earlier, the Bible says that when a cloud was positioned above the tabernacle, that meant that the Israelites were to stay where they were. But when the cloud lifted, they were to set out and follow. They had stayed at Mount Sinai for a year. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses. Aaron and Miriam had occupied a position of high honor and leadership in Israel. Both were endowed with prophetic gift, and both had been divinely associated with Moses in the deliverance of the Hebrews. The Lord stepped in, and Miriam became leprous. Moses pleaded for the Lord to heal her, so he replied that she was to be confined outside the camp for 7 days, and then allowed back in, and she would be healed. As the Israelites made camp at Kadesh, God told Moses to select 12 men, one from each tribe, to explore the land that God was to give to the Israelites. 2 of these men were Joshua and Caleb. Numbers 13, verses 1 and 2. the Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." Here's some of the results. First, take notice to verses 6 and verse 8. Hoshea is Joshua. They had finally come to the Jordan River and were about to enter into the promised land. Finally, after a year and a half in the desert. But first the Lord told Moses to send out 12 men to explore the land. Unfortunately, 10 of the 12 came back with very dismal news. The people who live there are powerful. What, more powerful than God? The cities were fortified. What, a problem for a God who parted the Red Sea? And the people are huge. In verse 30, then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." When the people shouted, and this is in chapter 14, verse 2, "If only we had died in Egypt or in the desert. We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Upon hearing this, Moses and Aaron fell face down. Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes. Here God was ready to destroy them all, but Moses pleaded. God relented, but said that except for Caleb and Joshua, none of the men who saw my glory and the miraculous signs will see the land I promised. God did answer their prayer, because all of them except Joshua and Caleb died in the wilderness. In chapter 14, verse 28, this is what is said. "As surely as I live, and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of the men who saw my glory and the miraculous signs I performed in Egypt and in the desert, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land I promised, an oath to their forefathers." So they wandered in the desert for 40 years. It took only 1 year and 4 months to get to the edge of the promised land. That is, 35 days walking to cover 300 miles from Egypt to Canaan. But the next 40 years starts here, now. Korah was the leader in this movement. He was a Levite and a cousin of Moses. He was a man of ability and influence. Though appointed to the service of the tabernacle, he had become dissatisfied with his position and aspired to the dignity of the priesthood. For some time, Korah had been secretly opposing the authority of Moses and Aaron, though he had not openly rebelled. Korah and his fellow conspirators, Dathan and Abiram, were men who had been favored with special manifestations of God's power and greatness. They were of those who went up with Moses into the mount and beheld his divine glory. But since that time, a change had come. They were successful in alienating 250 princes, leaders in the congregation. With these strong and influential supporters, they felt confident of making a radical change in the government and greatly improving upon the administration of Moses and Aaron. When Moses heard of this, it took him by surprise, and he fell face down. Then Moses went before the Lord, and the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, and here's verse 21, "Separate yourselves from this assembly, so I can put an end to this at once." So Moses warned the assembly to move away from these wicked men. And then from verses 28 to 30, "This is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things, and it was not my idea. If these men die a natural death, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about something totally new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them, and they go down alive into the grave, then you will know that these men have treated the Lord with contempt." And that is exactly what happened. Even with the removal of Korah and his followers, the Israelites continued to grumble. So the Lord told Moses to get 12 staffs from them, one from the leader of each of their tribe. On the staff of Levi, write Aaron's name. They were to be placed in the tent of meeting. The staff of the person I choose will sprout, and I will rid myself of this constant grumbling against you by the Israelites. The next day Moses entered the tent of the testimony and saw that Aaron's staff, which represented the house of Levi, had not only sprouted, but had budded, blossomed, and produced almonds. Then Moses was told to put the staff in front of the testimony. This was a special place in the tabernacle. and to be kept as a sign to the rebellious, and that it will be put an end to their grumbling. From Kadesh, the children of Israel had turned back into the wilderness, and the period of their desert travel of 40 years now having ended, they again stayed at Kadesh. Here, Miriam died and was buried. It is said that Miriam was 126 or 127 years old. The Lord said to Moses, "Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water." But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring the community into the land I give them." See, the Israelites traveled to the desert of Zin and stayed at Kadesh, but there was no water. Again, the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. The Lord told Moses, "Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out water." Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice. Moses, with the rod of God in his hand, struck the rock. He and Aaron were now aged men. Long had they been born with the rebellion and problems of Israel. But now at last, even the patience of Moses gave way. "Listen, you rebels," he cried. "Must we bring you water out of this rock?" And instead of speaking to the rock as God had commanded him, he struck it twice with a rod. What do you see wrong here? Maybe he felt silly talking to a rock. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." In Numbers 20 through 23, we find the death of Aaron. God told him they went up Mount Hor in the sight of the whole community. Moses removed Aaron's garments and put them on Eleazar, and Aaron died there on top of the mountain. And the Lord's command, Aaron the priest went to Mount Hor, where he died on the first day of the 5th month of the 40th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt. Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor. In Deuteronomy, this book contains the addresses that Moses gave during the final months of his life. When the Israelites were encamped in the plains of Moab prior to their entrance into the Promised Land, and this Ruth was discussed in an earlier study, was from the land of Moab, Moses gives a history of the last 40 years. The people were facing war, temptations, and a new settled way of life, all under a new leader, Joshua. This group here had not personally experienced the deliverance at the Red Sea or the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, so they needed to be reminded of God's power and God's law. Moses pleads with the Lord, and this wasn't the first time. He was in this from the beginning, and now he was not being able to enter the Promised Land? Is that fair? Just one slip-up? Moses was held to a higher standard than the others, just like our leaders today as found in the New Testament. God's response was no, and quit asking. I paraphrase that. But God did allow Moses to go up Mount Pisgah and look at the land. Take time to read the entire chapter, this chapter 8. It is full of the history of what God did for the people, even though they were a bunch of grumblers. It is a lesson to us to never forget how God has led us through dark times and tested us and humbled us in the process for that reason. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev, and the whole region from the valley of Jericho and the city of palms as far as Zoar. Moses was 120 years old when he died. There's a lot about the story of Moses that we saw in the last 4 sessions, but there's a lot we didn't see. We're looking here over his young life and his experiences. But how about some final thoughts? Since the last reading may still be on your minds, what might be a reason that God needs to test us and humble us? You may take some time to think of your journey and how God has walked with you through the dark times and how this was used for His glory. And how easy is it to forget all the blessings God has given you when life takes a wrong turn? Go back to the prayer Moses had with God after he received the 10 Commandments, came down from the mountain, and found the people in a big party around a golden calf. He then pleaded with God not to destroy all of them. When God decided to destroy only the worst of them, Moses then turned his thoughts on himself. Look at each part of his prayer and think whether you have ever prayed these thoughts for yourself. Discuss the importance of these requests in regards to your journey, your ministry, if you are currently involved or leading one, and your life decisions. As for the third request, be prepared for the answer you might get. Just never forget the patience that Moses had with what God called a stiff-necked, grumbling people.